Hi YouTube, this is Joe Calton with Calton Cutlery. Visit me on the web, caltoncutlery.com. Today we're going to start off a series of edge retention tip videos, okay? Seems like everywhere I look lately, magazines, the internet, forums, all that kind of stuff, it seems like everybody's wanting more and more edge retention on their cutlery, whether it be a pocket knife or a hunting knife or whatever, right? So you guys know me, I'm a knife maker, right? So I've spent a little bit more time with steel and edges than maybe the average guy, right? Also, in addition to being a knife maker, you know, I'm an outdoorsman. I hunt, fish, big game, small game, turkeys, you know. Never really got into hunting birds all that much, like pheasants or things like that. But anyway, so, you know, I use a knife for everything that's involved with that. I've been, you know, a house rehabber and a handyman in the past, and I still do quite a bit of that sort of stuff. And so, you know, an awful lot of that has to do with knives and cutting tools. I heat my shop with a wood stove, so I'm, you know, constantly out running chainsaws, you know, splitting with an axe or a wood splitter, you know. So I sharpen an awful lot of stuff, and I have a pretty good idea about, you know, steel and cutting tools, what they can and can't take. So this series is just going to be to share some of that. I would say that it is very, very rare that I will actually wear an edge out. Okay? So if you think about, you know, a pocket knife, right? You put a fresh edge on the pocket knife, right? Now, you use that knife until either you wreck the edge, okay? You cut a staple, or you, you know, you're skinning out an elk and you know, cut through too much hair going into the hide instead of coming up from underneath. You know, you wreck the edge on the sand and grit that's inside that elk's hair. You know, ended up having to open up a tin can, or, you know, you end up having to cut a shingle or something like that. Something that absolutely just wrecks the edge. You know, you're like, hey, if I cut this, I'm going to wreck my edge. It's not going to be sharp anymore. But circumstances dictate you go ahead and you do it anyway. All right, so the way a knife goes dull is that you'll wreck the edge, right? Or you use the edge until it starts to fade and then touch it up. Or you use a knife and then you decide, you know what, hey, just as part of my, you know, weekly routine, I'm going to take a look at my edge, see what it needs, touch it up if it needs it. Or you just use that edge until it's worn out. Okay, an example of that would be cutting insulation, you know, to insulate a new shop or something like that, right? So would it surprise you, with all the work that I do, it's very, very rare that I actually wear an edge out. Most of the time I wreck it, or my weekly maintenance, or whenever I think about it, you know, pop the knife open, take a look at the edge, just go ahead and touch it up because it makes me feel better. And that's just with plain Jane 1095 with my heat treat, which I think is pretty good. I've spent an awful lot of time on it. But even with, you know, even with kitchen knives in 1095, 440C stainless, choppers in 5160, hunters in 52100, you know, the couple of knives that I've made that I've used pattern welded 1095 and 15N20. And honestly, even in a lot of production knives or things like box cutters, you know, a lot of almost everything, I find that I end up wrecking an edge or touching it up long before I ever wear it out. Okay, now there's some reasons for that. Now, like I said, since I've spent quite a bit of time around cutting tools, I have a pretty good idea of what they can do and what they can't do. Here's a couple of examples. In my old shop, it was just a two-car garage attached to my house. The neighbor came up to me one day. His name was Bobby. I don't remember his last name, but he lived down the street next to the mailboxes. He comes up to me and he says, hey, Joe, I've got this hatchet, and I'm trying to cut this wood, and this hatchet's really dull. Can you sharpen it for me? So I said, okay. I take a look at the hatchet, and it is pretty dull. So I go ahead and I throw it on a belt grinder. I don't remember the exact grit progression, but probably started off with like a 60 grit, worked it down to a 220 grit, and then finished it off on a stone. Something probably would have taken me 5-7 minutes, something like that. Tested it out on my arm hair. It took some arm hairs off. You handed it to him, and away he went, just happy as could be. He comes back about an hour later, and he says, "Man, this thing's dull. It just don't hold an edge very long. Is the steel bad in it?" And I look it over, and, it was a regular old hatchet, had a wood handle on it, if I remember right. It didn't have a name brand on it or anything. And I thought to myself, I said, well, when I was sharpening it, it felt like it was okay steel. I mean, I didn't do a file check on it or anything, but, the burr came up, the burr moved from both sides, and then, it lightened up, and then it sheared off pretty well. So I said, I don't know, maybe I didn't get it sharpened enough, maybe it's bad steel, don't know. Here, I'll sharpen it up for you again. Sharpen it up for him again, took some hair off my arm. He went back, and that was the end of it. About 20 or 30 minutes later, I decided to go down to the mailboxes to check the mail. And here I see Bobby with this hatchet hacking on roots, and they're still in the ground. There's not a whole lot of steels out there that will take repeated impacts into dirt with rocks and still hold an edge. I mean, it just doesn't happen. So that was a case where this guy, he just didn't understand the relationship of steel and hardness and rocks and abrasion and all that kind of stuff. So he was expecting this hatchet. It could have been, the greatest hatchet in the world, but it's still not going to hold an edge if you, put the edge into dirt like that. And he just didn't understand that. So his expectation of this hatchet that should be holding an edge just didn't match up with reality. Another one is the Ginsu knives. I don't know if you guys have seen the Ginsu knife commercials. If you haven't, look some of them up. I'm sure they're on YouTube somewhere. But the Ginsu knives were kind of a gimmicky type of deal as far as I'm concerned. I did try a couple of them a long time ago, and I really wasn't impressed. They were like a kind of a weird serrated edge. And from what I remember those commercials, the guy was like, "Hey, this is a Ginsu knife right out of the package, right?" And then he takes it and he proceeds, Doc's after his ball again, to cut tin cans and, cut his butcher block and, cut all kind of stuff that he shouldn't be cutting with it, and then see how it would slice a tomato. And I think that and tests on YouTube where guys are like, hey, let's take this knife and let's beat it through mild steel and then let's cut, rope with it, have gotten kind of a skewed expectation of edge retention in like real life, right? So if you take a steel knife, make it out of any steel you want, okay? And you put a thin enough geometry on that knife to where it will cut efficiently and with less force the way a knife should, and then you go cut anything with that thing that's harder than, soft copper or somewhere around in there, then it's going to start dulling the crap out of that knife, and it's going to do so in a pretty rapid manner. All right? I mean, there's just not a whole lot of ways around it. You can make the steel harder, and you can make it harder, and you can make it harder, and you can kind of get an increase in edge retention up to a certain point until that edge starts becoming too hard, and it's too brittle, and it won't, it won't take a whole lot of cutting. Pretty much anything dulls. I mean, whether it's, good old-fashioned high-carbon steel, stainless steel, hell, carbide tooling in my lathe, the milling machine, and drill press. Carbide even dulls, and carbide is one of the hardest things out there. So anyway, probably what I'm saying here is if you're having problems with edge retention, you might want to take a look at what it is you're cutting. If you're cutting a lot of dirty cardboard that's got a whole lot of sand and grit in it, okay, that's going to wreck your edge. If you're cutting a lot of old used rope, like manila rope that's been drugged through the sand, in the dirt, been riding around in the back of a truck for a long time and is real dirty, you're probably not going to get very many cuts out of it. you're cutting clean rope, okay, great. If you're cutting pretty much anything in the kitchen that's, you know, soft, so like not frozen foods, but if you're cutting regular steaks or potatoes or onions, anything like that, you should have great edge retention. If you're cutting dirty carpet will wreck an edge so fast, I mean, like that. I mean, that's why the little carpet knives are double-sided and then double-ended, because you do a carpet job on a house and you'll go through 30 of those things just because it's that rough on an edge. Anytime you're cutting steel, you know, steel or iron or even copper or aluminum, things like that, you can kind of expect less edge retention. If you're filleting fish, you know, probably get great edge retention. I don't catch enough big fish to fillet very much. If you're skinning animals, like I said, with the elk or even deer, heck, even antelope. If you're, you know, if you're, you know, an antelope leg here, right? Okay, if you cut down into the fur, okay, that fur is going to dull your edge fairly quickly, all right? But if you go up, you know, use the point to get underneath the fur, and then you're cutting from the flesh side out, then you'll have quite a bit better luck in holding edge an awful lot longer, because now you're cutting clean flesh and not dirty fur. Anyways, so this first video, if you're having a problem with edge retention, first take a look at your expectations of the knife, and then adjust them accordingly. Like I said, you know, I've seen guys that'll wreck an edge on a hunting knife, you know, before they even get one mule deer skinned out. A couple of seasons ago, well, about 10, I decided to see how long I could go without sharpening up my knife. And I think that year I did my antelope, my daughter's antelope, my boy's antelope. I think we did 3 deer that year also, 3 mule deer. And then I think that year also got 2 additional whitetail dauphin tags. And I want to say there was 1 or 2 elk in there. And at the end of the season, I was still able to shave hair off my arm. Now that knife had not touched a stone the entire season. I did strap it on my palm or strap it on my jeans, you know, to clean it. But other than that, that was it. And that edge sailed through that whole season. Drove me nuts not tuning up my edge at the end of the day, but it was what it was. So again, this is Joe Calton with Calton Cutlery. You can visit me on the web, caltoncutlery.com. Hope you enjoyed the video, and stay tuned for the next one on edge retention. We'll probably do it on corrosion or something like that.